Alright, what's going on everybody? Captain here back with another Marvel Contest of Champions video. Today is another content creators program. Kabam has been kind enough to send out another character, part of the content creators program, to allow us to review the character. Totally not getting paid to do this at all, just do this review just to give our early takes, give any feedback that we find, if we find any bugs or whatnot, and to give you guys a little early access so you know when the character comes out. They give us the characters for only a few days to get to test them out, and then they take them away from our account. I do not get to keep this character, but yeah, I do get to test him out for a couple days before he's in the game, so it's going to be kind of fun. So I've been messing around with him for a little bit. So go ahead, first things first, hop into his abilities. He is, keep in mind, a 4-star at rank 5, level 50, and we'll start with his passive ability. So Omega Red's mutant physiology renders him immune to the effects of poison and reduces the damage of bleeds by 90%. So he's completely bleed immune and he's completely poison immune and bleeds. He only takes 10% of the actual damage what they would have been. Tentacle hits reduce 100% of damage inflicted by enemy abilities that deal passive damage when they are struck. So things like Electro, when you're hitting him, you won't take damage there. So then next thing is his death factor. So this is kind of his big thing, is these death spores. So while you're near the opponent, Omega Red inflicts 1 death spore every 0.5 seconds, up to a maximum of 10. Once the opponent is out of range, they lose 1 every 0.15 seconds. Death spores are not affected by ability accuracy. So it's proximity, kind of like with Blade. When you're close to the enemy that has a bleed on, you're going to be gaining power. It's like that. When you're close to them, you're going to be inflicting these death spores onto the enemy at every like half a second. And I think it does. It's quicker based on synergies, which we'll get into. But each death spore lowers the opponent's armor rating by 105 and reduces their chance to purify debuffs by 10%. So that's things like King Groot, Crossbones, Agent Venom. So they won't be able to shrug off these any debuffs if you once you have that death spore up to a certain rating. So then death spore struggles to affect mechanical components and inflicted 4 times slower against robots. So it just takes longer to inflict these against robot characters, because I mean it makes sense. They're a lot of time. Is there any tech champion or tech robots that aren't tech? I don't think there are. Not that I could think of. So then up next is the Death Field. While Omega Red is bleeding, he emits the Death Field. The Death Field causes death spores of nearby opponents to passively degen them, dealing 43.78 damage per second for each death spore on them. The Death Field is not affected by ability accuracy reduction, so that does stack. So based on however many death spores you have on them, it's going to be doing more damage based on that. While the death field is active, the limit of the death spores on the opponent increases up to 30. So that is the other thing with the death field. Normally, the death the death spores stack at up to 10. But while the death field is active, which you'll see in the video in the actual fighting, I'll showcase that it can increase up to 30. And again, that degen damage does stack up to the 30. It increases based on the amount. With his heavy attack, this is one of the biggest things with him too, is you want to use your heavy attack as frequent as possible. If you don't have degen on them, you want to get it because it does an insane amount of damage. So inflicts degen debuff for 7 seconds, so it's a decent length for the degen. 7 seconds, dealing 182 damage for each death spore on the opponent. So if you can have the ideal, you want to have the death field up, get him up to 30, get a heavy attack, and then that increases. You have the direct damage, the degen damage from the death field, you have the degen damage from the heavy attack. You just start ticking away damage like crazy. Death spores do not expire while the opponent is out of range of the death factor for as long as you have an active degeneration debuff. So that is the other thing with the death spores. If you're not close to them, when you're further away from them, they're going to start ticking away on the enemy. So you want to be close to them at all costs. Obviously playing smart and not getting hit by like heavy attacks and stuff like that, but you want to do your best to stay close so you can keep that death spores up. And then but while you have the degen on them from the heavy, if you're further away from them, the death spores will not tick. They will not go away. They'll they remain the same as long as that degen is active. So that's what I mean by getting that heavy off as soon as possible. The second that first degen expires, you want to get another one on there because they do not stack and you can't refresh it. You'll see that in the video as well. If you already have one degen on, you can't use another heavy and restart the timer, and it doesn't stack. So that's kind of one thing. His heavy attack is very similar to the likes of Cable, especially because it inflicts a degen. But just the whole feel of it, throws out the tentacles. It's very similar, has a very similar feeling. But yeah, so that you'll see that again in the video. So then his special one removes all death spores for opponent from the opponent to inflict a life steal, stealing 98 health for the opponent for each death spore removed by this attack. And again, this is based on the amount. It stacks, it multiplies, so the more death spores you have, the more health you're going to get back. Special 2, Omega Red emits the death field for 10 seconds. So again, the death field is what allows it to get the death spores to stack up to 30. So that's basically what the special 2 does. It activates that for 10 seconds so you can get the death spores up as high as possible. Special 3, remove all death spores from the opponent to inflict essence steal for 3 seconds, passively stealing both 170 health and 3.3% current power from the opponent for each death spore removed by this attack. Again, it stacks, and if you use a special 3 while you've got 30 stacks of the death spores, well, let's just say I have a little clip of that happening, and you'll see the regen is ridiculous, guys. So that is a quick overview of his basic abilities. So before I get into his special ability, I don't think his special ability is 100% necessary. Like with all this stuff that I've just gone over, you can still do a lot of damage. Getting him awakened is, like any champion generally, is gonna, just give him a little bit extra bonus. But with this character in particular, you don't have to have him awakened, but it will help him. So when he is awakened, the death spores on the opponent deal 973 damage per second. So think of this like Void with his intimidating presence. While he has those debuffs on him, the enemy is just ticking away damage. So once you have the death spores on the opponent, they're instantly going to be taking damage dealt from the death spores. And then also Omega Red's basic tentacle hits have a 30% chance to be unblockable. So that's kind of another thing to keep in mind when you use your basic attacks with the tentacle. So I'm not sure exactly which ones they are just yet. I haven't really focused on that because I kind of forgot that was a thing, and it just kind of happened. It does happen one time in the fight I'm going to show you guys. But yeah, it is something to kind of note. You can get some unblockable attacks, so that's kind of cool. Moving on to I think his synergies before I get into the fight. Some pretty good synergies, really only one that's a really good one, I think, in terms of help beneficial toward Omega Red. Other than that, the rest are pretty solid. So Omega Red with either Wolverine or Colossus, we have plus 4% critical damage for each death spore on the opponent. So the death spores will be doing more damage. Wolverine gets a 20% stronger bleed and a 5% crit rating, 20% attack rating for each armor up buff on well-timed blocks granted, and well-timed blocks grant an armor buff max stack of 1. So Colossus gets a little bit of attack boost there based on his armor ups. I haven't tested that out yet. Up next, we have a synergy with Deadpool, X-Force, and Sabretooth. So Omega Red, this is the one I was saying that I think is probably the most important one. 30% faster rate to inflict the death spores and 30% longer rate for the death spores to be removed. So this one, those death spores are going to stack a lot faster. You'll get to that 10 quicker, and even that 30 when you have the the death field active. I think that's what it's called. And then when you're further away from them, it's going to take longer for that to tick down and tick away. So then with Deadpool X-Force, he gets a 25% power rate against bleeding opponents. Sabretooth has a 30% chance for basic claws. Basic claw hits inflict bleed, dealing 40% of attack as direct damage over 4 seconds. That is a pretty good, helpful, for Sabretooth. It does give him a little bit more bleed damage, which is kind of cool. But in terms of Omega Red, that's probably his best synergy, is increasing and decreasing the death spore thing. And then here we have Seeing Red with Red Skull and Red Hulk. So with Omega Red, well-timed blocks have 100% chance to inflict 1 death spore up to a max of 30 total. So that's another one that is pretty good. So even while you don't have the death field active, you can still stack above 10 with this synergy. So that's probably the second best one in my opinion. For Red Skull, while under 1 bar of power, changing Red Skull's heavy attack grants an unstoppable buff for 2 seconds. If hit while unstoppable, the buff is removed and Red Skull immediately executes the heavy attack. I don't really know much about Red Skull, so I can't really help you on that one, so I don't know what that means. Then for a Red Hulk, 25% power rate against incinerated opponents. So just a little bit extra power. And then the last one, Deadly Presence. We have the death field deals 10% more damage. So it is 10%. It's a nice little chunk there, but it's not essential. It's not going to, like, you know, make or break the character. Mephisto, the Aura of Incineration, deals 50% more damage. Void, Intimidating Presence debuffs deal 10% more damage. That is one for Void that I think might make him even better. Because again, 10%, it's nothing to sleep on. 10% is 10%. That's a good amount. So I'd be interested to test that out. Haven't gotten to do that just yet. But that is going to do it with his basic abilities, guys. I've been talking way too long. I was trying to keep this short and sweet, but there was just so much to get through, so much to read. So I think what I'm going to do instead, so this video isn't crazy long, is this will be part 1, where it's just the review and showing his abilities and everything, and then part 2 will be posted either at the same time or just a couple minutes after this one, showcasing his abilities, which is part 2. So that's going to do it for this part of the review, guys. I hope you enjoyed it, and make sure to check out part 2, where I show off a pretty insane fight against Scarlet Witch. Starts out a little rocky, but, you know, I come through in the end, and I hope you guys enjoy it.